actually, to that point, this is, one of the, if you know me, you know that one of the philosophers I've studied the most is Soren Kierkegaard, or Kierkegaard, if you want to be fancy, but we won't be. Kierkegaard's big thing, among other things, is what's popularly called the leap of faith. But this idea that we find in Fear and Trembling, where actually leap of faith isn't mentioned there. Sorry, nerdy, got to be nuanced here. But in Fear and Trembling, it's this idea of Abraham. It's wrestling with faith and ethics, right? That Abraham feels like God is telling him to sacrifice his son, but that goes against the ethical norm of being a good father and not murdering his son, right? And so it's like, what do you do when what God commands you overrides what's socially communicable in terms of ethical behavior? And there's a lot happening here regarding the story, the Akedah of Abraham's sacrifice to Isaac, that we could talk about what's going on there and the history of it, the performative nature of it, everything that's going on. But the point here is that what people will sometimes take with that story is like, well, Kierkegaard is basically giving a justification of like 9/11, right? Like, sure, it's unethical to kill a bunch of combatants in the World Trade Center, but like, I have this thing with God that lets me override what's understood as common decency and ethical behavior. So it justifies everything. And I think, and really any type of fundamentalist violence can be justified this way. But I think the thing that gets missed in the faith Kierkegaard is describing versus something like what we'd see on 9/11, or this idea of like, it's the obviousness. Because Kierkegaard's whole idea is that, the reason it's called Fear and Trembling is because it should fucking terrify you. Osama bin Laden and his folks were not terrified. It was obvious to them. They didn't trust with trepidation. They knew. Because fundamentalism, by its very nature, is foundationalist. It rests on a certainty of knowledge, right? And so I think that that's one thing that differentiates, the type of faith I would describe from the justifications of the violent fundamentalist. Is like, they're not fucking terrified. It's so obvious to them. Like, these guys who are talking about, well, this is all part of Jesus's plan to bomb Iran. It's so obvious to them. And the whole point of faith is that sometimes it might not be communicable, but like, you're still called to act, right? And it should fucking terrify you, right? Now, for Kierkegaard later on, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in Fear and Trembling, and he's dealing with Hegel and all this other stuff. For Kierkegaard, it's very obvious that the God-man, Jesus, is the example of what Christianity should be. And he says in his attack on Christendom that anytime Christianity wraps itself in power, it's no longer viable. Like, it's not the thing anymore, right? So whatever Kierkegaard's idea of faith should be, it doesn't involve wrapping yourself in power and making statements that you act like are obvious.